Today we have with us Darab Nagarwalla. Um, Darab, well, he has been working in the field of environment and environmental education for a very long time, and we thought it would be great to have someone who's talking explicitly or specifically about teaching regarding the environment, and that's why we are quite excited to have you here and look forward to your talk. Just to give you a brief introduction about Darab, he did his BSc in Environmental Science from Northland College in Wisconsin. Uh, and after that, he spent almost 17 years working with NGOs around the issues of environmental degradation and livelihoods, uh, both in village communities in Saurashtra and in Kumaon and Garhwal in Uttarakhand. And post that, like he says, he reinvented himself as an outdoor and environmental educator. Uh, and he trained in Goshen College, Indiana, for a licentiate in environmental education, which allows him to teach as an environmental educator in any international school around the world. So he's really passionate about using outdoors as a teaching tool. Um, and he really feels that there's a need to connect theory with relevant real life concerns and experiences. Um, and in his own words, he says he has a natural affinity to the lovable craziness of the world of middle school students. So, uh, keeping that in mind, we really look forward to hearing from you, Darab. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Joy. Yeah, please. Let's put this in my pocket now. Thank you so much, Joy, uh, for that lovely introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me here today to speak to you about something that I'm really passionate about. Um, and I was hoping that we could actually talk about some tools that you can use if you're interested in teaching about the environment. And I also feel that the tools that I'm going to talk about can be applied to every other subject as well. So if you're interested in education and the humanities, these tools will work for you. Um, please go ahead. Uh, I normally don't like the idea of reading out from a PowerPoint presentation because you all know how to read, and it's bad manners. But I would like to actually read out these quotes because later I'm going to come to the power behind words, and so I want to just kind of give a few of these quotes my own spin. So please bear with me. I'm going to read these out for you. Our students frequently and routinely think about the world in ways that evoke their imaginations, their emotions and imaginations. Educators are in the business of meaning making, and at the end of the day, school day, meaning requires emotion. Next, please. So I've been inspired during my education courses by the work of Lev Vygotsky, and the person who I'm going to talk about next has also been inspired by him. Many of you, I'm sure, know about Lev Vygotsky, the fact that he was a brilliant Russian educational psychologist who died very early, incidentally. He was only 37. But he came up with some really groundbreaking ideas, which I think kind of have sort of suffused into a lot of modern educational ideas that work today. Um, one of the things that particularly struck me about his work was the idea of cognitive tools and how fundamental language and writing is to our ways of experiencing the world and making meaning out of how we see the world, how we experience the world. And the other thing that really struck me about him was the whole idea of zone of proximal development, which is to take a cricketing analogy, when you get the middle of the bat, or in baseball, my American friends call it the sweet spot. So that sweet spot, when you're a teacher, is so important, because if you pitch your ideas in the middle of the circle, which is what I can do already, then you stand a chance of your students getting bored. If you pitch it too high, in this part of the circle, what I can't do, then you also end up losing your students, because they feel inadequate, and some of them actually become disruptive because they can't handle it. If you pitch it somewhere in here, what I can do with help, then you have a whole range of possibilities. And then it all depends on how much scaffolding a particular student needs and what kind of scaffolding they need, right? Then you can cater for individual needs of your student, and then they're challenged just the right amount to be able to feel that it's not too easy and it's not too difficult, and I can make this intellectual leap to something that I've never done before, or maybe I've never really thought about before. Next, please. So Dr. Kieran Egan is really my inspiration. And he identified cognitive tools that Lev Vygotsky first talked about. He took it to another level altogether, and he actually started looking at each developmental stage of a child and seeing what kinds of cognitive tools a child uses at different stages of their development. And I'm going to read out this quote as well. We begin as poets using the techniques that language allows us to make sense of our world. Next, please. So I don't want to get into, this is quite overwhelming, but the reason why I wanted to show you this was just to show you the amount of work that's gone into trying to map out the different ways that children and young people actually learn, and what are the kinds of ways that appeal to them. So you've got these different stages of development, and as you can see, they're all centered around language, right? So very young children at the pre-linguistic stage, where they don't have any language, right? They basically experience the world directly. And they may communicate through gestures, through body language, eyes, and so on. So these are the ways that appeal to them, right? And so if you're teaching really young children, then if you bring these things into your teaching, then you're tapping into what their imaginations are already attuned to. And so it makes it easier for you to get through to them. Once kids start actually learning to speak, then they start looking at the world in a different way, and these are the things that appeal to them. Written language, which comes at a later stage, again, that like opens up the world in a completely different way, and also it broadens it tremendously. So once you have those written symbols, then you can start actually learning about things which aren't in front of you, right? And there you have these kinds of things that kids seem to be attuned to, and they use these kinds of things. They like these kinds of ways of relating to the world, and so you can tap into that. Theoretic use of language and reflexive use of language are for older kids, and that last one is actually probably more appropriate for for those of you students in the audience, because you're at the stage where you're looking for a bigger picture. You're not satisfied with just reading something that directly connects you to the world, but you're looking for, so how does this connect to larger processes, to larger trends, to what's happening globally, and also looking into the micro as well. So how does something out here or perhaps out there in the solar system relate to something that's happening microscopically and those kinds of things. Okay? So next, please. And this is out there. All this stuff is out there. If any of you are interested, I'll share the links, and you can delve into them in your own time. So I would like to pick out a few of these cognitive tools. And before I go any further, I just wanted to qualify. Thank you, Joy. Just want to qualify. Just because you're at the age you are doesn't mean that the kind of cognitive tools that would appeal to a young child wouldn't appeal to you, or me for that matter. Like, for example, humor, right? Humor appeals to everybody. It doesn't matter what the age group is. So those are the kind of cognitive tools that work across all the ages. And some of them are more suited to younger children. Some of them are obviously more suited to young adults, right? Like theoretical use of language wouldn't really be appropriate for middle school children or elementary children. So first one I wanted to talk about was humanization of meaning. And the other thing I wanted to qualify was, this is not some amazing new discovery at all. A lot of teachers use these techniques and have always used them. Even in our traditional teaching, many teachers have used these techniques. They just haven't used the jargon. It hasn't hit them that they're using a particular technique that appeals to a particular age group. So I do want to qualify that I'm not trying to make this out to be some magic bullet or anything like that, but just to draw your attention to the fact that some of these things actually hit on the way that kids are already thinking, and seems to appeal to them. And if you try and bring this into your teaching, you can actually be very effective. So basically, if I understand correctly, what it's trying to say, and I want to relate this to the whole idea that, at least in, I think, my jamana, I would say that the education that I had was much more about the kind of education that, an agrarian society in transition, trying to transition into an industrialized society would have, right? But we are way past that now. That kind of education is no longer relevant. What we need is much more about taking old knowledge that's already there, that someone else has come up with, and trying to do something new with it, trying to look at it in new ways, right? And that's why this particular quote, it really emphasizes this idea that knowledge is a part of living human tissue, because it's part of our brain cells. Our brain cells are living tissue. What's in books and libraries that's dead wood. Okay? Paper it used to be a tree at one time, it's not any longer. It's dead. But to bring it to life, it's not enough just to open that book and read it. Okay? It's the emotions that are important. So how do we find that emotion that led to that passage in that textbook in the first place, and try and bring that emotion into what we're trying to teach? I think that's what this is talking about. And obviously, trying to relate what you're teaching to the people or persons who had something to do with discovering it in the first place. can be a really, really powerful tool that, that brings that emotion into it. Next, please. Um, Second one, and this is actually goes back to, I think, the oral language phase, affective mental imagery. There's something which you might have heard of which works really well with young children called guided play, where you get them to close their eyes and you narrate a story or a situation. And it just takes them to that place and actually makes them experience those things and can affect them really profoundly. And I think that, if you're open to it even for adults, it is possible for words to affect you very, very profoundly. When you read a passage in a book that hits you emotionally, I'm sure all of you have experienced that. So the idea that words can be used to evoke mental images is really important. And so there again, especially because of, when you're teaching about the environment, honestly, I mean, emotions are really the most powerful thing that we have to talk about it, because, you know, the science of it, I don't know, even though I'm passionate about the environment, a lot of the science doesn't really inspire me, the way it comes across to me. I need something more than that. And so I try and look for something about that topic that touches me. And I realized I was doing this long before I found out about how important this is, So something about the topic that touches you, something that appeals to you or gives you an emotional tug, as it says. Can you find that? And can you somehow bring that into your teaching? And again, this doesn't only apply to teaching about the environment, but I think it's very, very crucial for teaching about the environment, because it is an emotional thing, really, It's, next, please. So this was just an example which I used with my middle school students and which worked, and I just wanted to show this to you as an example. So I could have started out a unit on genetics by saying, okay, so this is what genetics is about, right? Chromosomes, DNA, etc., genetic code, bases, etc. Instead, I thought I'll try an experiment. So I asked this set of questions. Are all people treated equally in the world? And there was a fierce debate in the class. And this was eighth class students. Then if no, can you name some reasons why? Let's list them. So again, lots of arguments. I didn't tell them how I was going to list them. I just made 2 columns. My 2 columns were basically what's under our control and what's not under our control. Okay? So are all of these reasons under a person's control? No. Is it fair to treat people differently? No. And again, fierce debate. So we had all kinds of things. So under our control, we had education, for example. We had clothing. We had personal hygiene. We had things like body language. And over here, we had skin color. We had accent. We had, what else did we have? We had eye color, hair color, things like that. And so it came down to, yes, we discriminate against people for things which are totally not under their control. What is it that controls that? It's genetics. It's chromosomes. Now are you interested? Would you like to know something about chromosomes? And almost everyone said, yes, what is it? What are chromosomes? What are these things? Next, please. And And there we have it, So these things which lead to so many issues. Oh, I forgot the most important thing in there was gender. Next, please. Um, this was another one which I found, especially teaching about the environment. And again, uh, I found this important without realizing that it was important. So, you know, in fact, I think probably you can relate to this as well, even though this is typically something you see with teenagers because they feel kind of hemmed in by rules and they feel like they're, not in control. That it's adults who are basically controlling everything and they're just sort of blindly following a set of rules and, routines and so on. And so there's this natural kind of need to find a hero, to find an icon, someone or something that represents uh, a breaking away from that, an ability to get beyond that. And you'll find this with a lot of teenagers that they aspire to become something, they look up to someone. It could be anything. It could be a sports icon, it could be a scientist, it could be a musician. It depends on their particular bent of mind. But a lot of them do that. And I think we keep those icons well into adulthood. Maybe they change. Maybe they're not the same one that you had when you were a teenager, but you probably still look up to certain people. And because they represent someone who's been able to get beyond certain things that maybe you would like to get beyond. And that seems to work because by associating with people like that, we ourselves gain confidence that we can deal with the world. And the interesting thing here is that Dr. Egan experimented on this, and he realized that it doesn't have to be a person that you talk about here. It can be a thing, right? So some of these examples, like for example, the tenacity of that weed on a rock face, the persistence of stones, the serenity of cats, etc. So it's basically anything that can be associated with that heroic quality can work really well in teaching about the environment. So I keep thinking about how, in a way, our river flowing through Pune has such heroic qualities, just battered and buffeted, closeted, contained, uh, polluted, and yet still flowing and still trying desperately to provide those things which it has always provided to, at one time it was dinosaurs, it was prehistoric man, it was, kings and queens and travelers and all kinds of people, that it provided all these things for, still trying to provide those things and just, crying out for us um, to bring it back to what it was, Definitely heroic qualities there. Next, please. Again, just an example I wanted to give you. And this was, this is what gave me the emotional tug. So first of all, about genetics, it was gender discrimination in particular, but other forms of discrimination also, racial discrimination. That's the emotional tug that that I thought of bringing in. The other thing was the gender discrimination which took place with Rosalind Franklin, because when we learn about who discovered the shape of the double helix, we always hear about Watson and Crick. We never hear about Rosalind Franklin, and the fact that her colleague was the one who showed her X-ray diffraction picture to Watson and Crick, and that's how they figured out what that double helix looked like, and then they got the Nobel Prize when she actually should have got it. And several people have, I believe, quoted and said that even if she had been the first one to discover it, she still wouldn't have got it because science just wasn't willing to accept that a woman could be capable of earning the Nobel Prize. And that was 1962. This happened in the early 1950s. So yeah, so Rosalind Franklin, associations with the heroic, definitely a hero, and also a human figure who kind of exemplifies that whole idea of like the cutting edge of genetics and 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 yeah. Next, please. Um, this was another a tool which, again, I think this appeals to all of us. But it's associated more with younger children. But I think we're all fascinated by extremes, right? So I just thought I'd throw that in for you. So just some interesting facts about DNA, which are not normally something that your teacher would tell you when they're teaching about genetics and DNA. And it's kind of humbling, isn't it, to know that we share 60% of our genes with fruit flies and also with pigs, apparently. That's pretty humbling. And also how the DNA molecule is so incredibly twisted in so many dimensions that if you unravel it, it's extremely long, long enough to basically cover our solar system. Next, please. And then another, and this one I'm sure, I mean, we all, I think, believe in this, especially for teaching about the environment. And Ashokji does this all the time in the Science Activity Center, is changing the context. So that dry, desiccated, those symbols, that text in the textbook comes alive in the Science Activity Center. So it's that change of context with doing a simple experiment to actually realize that if you tie a plastic bag around a leaf of a tree, that you're actually going to find water in it. And then actually looking at the equation for photosynthesis and respiration and realizing that, oh, there's water in there, and also testing water quality. So taking some stinking water from the river and saying, I wonder what's in there that makes it stink. And then actually testing it for things like dissolved oxygen, realizing there's hardly any oxygen in there. And that's why it stinks so bad. Next, please. And yeah, just a quick thing. Really important to kind of bring abstract concepts to life, right? Like the whole idea of photosynthesis, respiration, all these things are extremely abstract, especially for a middle school kid. But to actually see water in that bag, to realize that when I weighed that plastic bag before I put it on the tree, it weighed 3 grams. Now it weighs 8 grams. There's actually 5 grams of water in there. Where did it come from? It actually came from a process. And then just a few other examples. This was a really funny one. Ashokji, I think this would appeal to you. This was a simulation of how the digestive system works. And so this is supposed to be mimicking the colon. That's why you see that expression. That's a 6th grade student there. This is boys mimicking what the small intestine does with a stocking. And I think we used maida and food coloring and things like that for this. It was quite a hit. And then here we're looking at basically trying to understand why rainwater is already a little bit acidic, and using soda to simulate the rainwater, heating it, and then testing it with lime water to see that there's carbon dioxide in it. What else? Yeah, over here, that's for all you chemists out there. That's a reactivity series. So that's actually testing different metals to see how reactive they are, seeing if they change color. And this was actually looking at variation and actually like measuring trees and seeing which side of the tree had more moss or lichen, and which way the branches, which side of the tree had more branches on it, and things like that. Next, please. And then real life experiences, again, I think are really the heart and soul of teaching about the environment. So, and those real life experiences can come from case studies as well. You can't always go out and see those things, but we are so blessed with so much in terms of there's excellent videos which you can watch, and they can transport you anywhere in the world to talk to people and see things that are happening. And you can actually take people out, and you can take yourself out for your own field trip and actually experience things. And that is, it's very convincing to all of us, I think, to actually see something in real life and then put it in its theoretical kind of place. And so here, this is actually a field visit to the confluence of the Ram Nadi and the Mura. To try and understand how these rivers have been affected by urbanization, and still how resilient they are, because we saw a lot of birds. We saw there was a very nice patch of riparian forest there, and this kid had never actually, I'm sure he had seen a flying fox before, but he didn't know what it was. He thought they were birds. So this was the first time he was actually seeing flying foxes roosting in a tree with binoculars and hearing all the chattering, and he was very fascinated by that. Next, please. And then, of course, I think the inspiration that we get from hearing about people who have done something worthwhile is also like really so crucial. For me, it continues to be my source of strength for for teaching about the environment. So this actually is in the Wildlife Institute of India in Dehradun. And this gentleman here is C.P. Sharma, who's a technical officer, and he's the guy that when he hears about a poacher being nabbed with some animal parts or an animal found dead somewhere, he hops on a bus and just heads out there. And he's like the first responder. And he was talking to, this is a group of sixth graders on a field trip about wildlife crime and how they try and figure out like where this animal is from, and how they recognize what kind of animal it is. And I think he's showing a skull there, and you can see there's a glass case there with all kinds of bones and things in there. So again, a real life hero and someone who's a source of inspiration. And I think there's many people like that around who we can tap into, especially in a city like Pune. I think there's a lot of people who are passionate about the environment, who are doing various things, who you can talk to, you can interview them, you can go and see their work, and so it's fertile ground for that. And I think there's really I can't stress enough the importance of inspiration when it comes to teaching about the environment. Next, please. And then, of course, the idea that you can make a difference. So I drafted this letter and I left some blanks there for the kids to fill in. So the idea was that if you're concerned about what you saw when you went on that field trip and you saw the state of the river, and you also saw that there's still birds, you heard that there's still two species of fish that are desperately trying to survive in that water, what are you going to do about it? Write a letter. So the idea was that, uh, so the formal part, we all kind of agreed on together. I drafted this, but I left parts of the letter blank for them to put their own thoughts about, I believe my city should have a living river. What does that mean to me? And actually mail it to the commissioner. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that anything is going to happen, but the whole idea that I too can make a difference, you know, I'm not just totally helpless here, you know, and that every little bit counts. Uh, Next, please. And that's all I have for you today. And now I think that I still have a few minutes left, so I'll throw open the floor for questions. Thank you.
Any questions?
Thank you. I think there will be many more questions, so I'll start and I can ask my second question if there is time later.
Sure.
So the first one I'll ask is, see, you wrote about this, or you mentioned about
Yeah.
doing the hands-on stuff either in the lab or in the field
Yeah.
as change of context.
Yes.
Right? So I just want to understand that a little better, specifically in the context of
Ah.
science education.
Yeah.
That say, like say when you're teaching science, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you wonder what really happens when you do something in the lab.
Yeah.
Actually, you're doing the same thing. You know, what you studied in the book, you're pretty much
Yeah.
reproducing that because it's a very controlled experiment.
Yeah.
Now, what does it do cognitively besides, I guess, just seeing this thing in action? Yeah. So
Yeah.
the books have not fooled you. That part is clear.
Right.
But what else does it do in terms of education
Right.
for a in a science education?
I think that's
context.
an excellent question. You know, and I was just thinking about this just before I walked into the room. So the change of context, I don't think I explained it well, but or at all maybe. But I think what that tool is referring to is the idea that, you know, a classroom has a particular context which can become a very boring routine for a lot of students, you know. The way you walk in, the way you sit down, what happens next, the way the teacher presents the material. And so anything that gets away from that routine is important, you know. So one of the analogies that I was reading up a little bit more on that was about, you know, like when you learn how to, let's say, ride a motorbike, and how you're so alert and, you know, you're so afraid when you start out. And then once it becomes second nature to you, you don't even realize that you're changing gears or braking or whatever. And that's when you can start getting a little careless and complacent, because then your brain can actually switch off and start thinking about something else. And then you suddenly realize that there's a pothole or someone driving down the wrong side of the road at you and things like that. So the change of context was a way to kind of break that monotony. And I was really, you know, my head of department at Woodstock School, where when I reinvented myself, I started teaching science in middle school. He happened to come in and observe me while I was actually having the eighth class students actually use a little light box, which is just a box with a little bulb and, a lens and actually draw, a protractor on a piece of paper and set up a mirror and actually see how the law of reflection works. And several of the kids remarked to me, like, Mr. Nagarwalla, why are we wasting time on this? We already know the law of reflection, right? We know how it works. Uh, so I said, yeah, I know that you've read it. I know you know how it works, but does it actually work like that in real life? So I want you to actually try this out. And so, okay, then. And then at the end of it, I said, so were you bored? And they said, actually, no. We actually realized that that human error is extremely important in experiments, because if we got that, the angle of the light box just slightly wrong, then we didn't get the answer we should have. That light didn't reflect at the same angle we thought it should reflect at. So they learned a valuable lesson which I actually hadn't really thought about. The whole idea that learning about experiments and human error and so on. So I think that doing experiments in the lab, yes, I do believe that when you start out, is basically you present it like a recipe, right? So all the steps are laid out and you just follow the steps. And we really emphasize the analysis part and the presentation of your results part. But gradually, as you become more comfortable with those procedures, then I think that the whole idea that you can actually start designing your own experiments. So you follow a prescription, but then you throw in another variable and say, okay, use the same set of materials and roughly the same procedure, but how would you test for this? Can you come up with a a research question? Can you come up with a hypothesis and change the procedure a little bit? And that's where it starts to actually then cognitively find that zone of proximal development. So yeah, I understand what you're saying, that in a sense those prescriptions and doing those standard labs can be just like reading the textbook. But the other aspect is that it brings out group dynamics. So when you have a group of kids working together, you break them up. Sometimes you break them up according to their sort of ability. Sometimes you break them up where you have someone who's like always pushing the boundaries with other kids who are always kind of struggling at the back. And you create different sets of dynamics, and that actually helps your students to actually become better at working with other people. So there's a lot of aspects to those just doing a simple lab that one normally doesn't think about. But I think the whole teamwork angle is a very important one. So it's worth doing them. It's very much worth doing them, and then you can start to bring in a little spin of your own and changing a variable, and and then actually start designing experiments. And I think that's and Ashokji again, the number of little variations on one particular theme that I just saw in the Science Activity Center is a perfect example of that. Taking one basic idea and then trying to, find lots of variations around that. I hope I answered your question.
No, you certainly did. But I was just
Yeah.
a little bit of a follow-up. So
Yeah.
you did list quite a few things that the context, and then this changing things, group dynamics, all that. No, so are you by chance implying that the change of context is one of the most important things among all of that? Is that can we take it like that way?
I think in science, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because see, otherwise the context is basically the text.
Correct. Right.
And the chalk and talk.
Right.
you know, and because so many, I think so many science teachers feel so constrained that they don't have the right equipment. If only they could meet
Right.
Ashokji and get inspired to use trash and make all kinds of
Right.
you know, toys and experiments and things out of that. But
Because
I think, yeah, that's a huge problem, you know, that a lot of science teachers really feel like, how do I teach this? I don't have the equipment, and so it doesn't happen.
I
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Uh, so the impression that I get from what you said is
yeah,
the tools that you're talking about seem to me more in the nature of improving the motivation for learning.
right.
But there's another aspect which you probably didn't touch upon, or maybe these tools don't fit into that,
Yeah,
which is something of a concern for a large fraction of teachers, let's say,
yeah,
is to go from what you see to go to something that is slightly abstract, where you build an idea,
right,
right? Not just plain stare at what is around you, but
right.
go a little beyond and try to develop a concept.
Yeah,
Where do you think these tools fit for the
yeah.
next step?
That's that's a really good question. I think my presentation really missed out on that part. I think that's where you know, I think what probably applies to what you're getting at would be more things like the the mental imagery perhaps, and also the humanization part, to just to bring in more about the people involved, or people who are important to that particular concept, who perhaps discovered it first, or who worked on it, and their stories and things like that. But again, like you very rightly said, it's more about motivating the student to delve deeper and find out more for themselves, and take more initiative. And what you're doing is really just kind of pointing them
Right.
in the right direction. But yeah, I think um, if I think you would maybe enjoy looking at
Sure.
some of the explanations of some of the cognitive tools for the, you know, older students, because the way they're explained are really quite interesting, and I think they would make a lot of sense uh, if you actually have a look at them, and I'll share the links.
feel about these extremes can be relevant in this case, right?
Yes,
Where you have to then analyze how is this possible, right?
yeah,
For
yeah, exactly. I mean, some of those things are just unbelievable. You know, like what's the rarest element? And I think one of my students actually asked me that, and we looked it up on the spot. It turned out to be astatine, I think, and it was like something like, because it's unstable, that there's probably only 1.5 grams of astatine available on the planet at any given moment in time. So that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So my first question, there are two things. One is it's like a reminder. I think you said something about using words at the
Yeah.
beginning, which
Yeah.
you said you would come to later.
Right.
Maybe I missed that. I don't know.
Right.
That
Right.
was one thing.
Yeah.
And the question that I had is about your point about associations with the heroic.
Yes.
So this is something I always find very dicey when you're in a science institute, particularly,
Yeah.
because a lot of times some of the good stories are good. That's
Yeah.
not an issue.
Yeah.
But there are some gray areas. And see, we are humans. So nothing is never going to be, black and white.
Yeah.
So this is not a problem with students, because students are going to be receptive to the picture the way I paint it.
Right.
So if I say Rosalind Franklin was an important part of it, they'll
Right.
lap it up.
Yeah.
Not a problem. But let's say I'm dealing with a group of teachers.
Yes.
So I had to face this question in my mind. So when I'm talking to teachers, do I leave it as a open-ended thing that, this is something that might have happened, but we don't know because this is what is in literature, this is hearsay.
Yeah.
So I took that, at the end of the day, I took that path. I
Yeah.
didn't say that this is right, or this was not with regards to Rosalind Franklin. This was
Right.
about PCR and how Carrie Mullis invented it. So there are a lot of question marks in that story.
Okay.
So I kind of left it open. I said, I'm not going to go into the controversy because I don't want to. I want to focus more on the technique and how it has helped us.
Right. Right.
So that's something that I found to be very tricky to deal with a live audience. When you're students, like I said, students will lap up. I know very well that they'll take it up, whatever I say, they believe me.
Yeah.
But because see, science, when in a science institute, you imagine it to be free of biases.
Yeah.
You don't want to paint a picture which is too positive or too negative about anything, right?
Right.
So how do you balance that out? That's the question.
That's a really tough question. But honestly, I think at the end of the day, it's about knowing what will work with your audience. So I think it sounds like you handled it in exactly the right way, because basically you want to bring some emotion into it. You want to bring something tangible into it. So like a very abstract idea of the PCR, but kind of bringing it to the person who invented it, discovered it, uh, but kind of skirting around the controversy and saying how important it has been and kind of emphasizing that. That sounds like an excellent way to talk about it without creating, basically bringing the controversy to the forefront where it might disrupt your whole, the whole point of what you were trying to explain. But at the same time, you could actually use that controversy in a constructive way also, by just allowing people to just air their different views and then basically reaching a kind of let's agree to disagree. So you can use that also, because that stirs up emotion. Controversy stirs up emotion, and that's good. So I think it's really up to your reading of your audience and what can work, what without seriously offending anyone. But stirring up controversy and stirring up some heated argument is a good thing. And about the words, sorry, so when I use those questions about like are people treated equally, that's what I meant actually. As an example of how I just used a few simple questions. It stirred up so much. I mean, kids were shouting at each other. Some of the boys were like really getting their hackles raised about, what do you mean gender discrimination and so on, and and some of the girls were saying it happens right here in this very class, and you're responsible for it. And so just a few simple words, a few simple questions which I put innocently enough, but it really stirred up something there. Because I guess it created mental images, I mean, the kids were remembering things someone had said to them, something that, those emotions came to the forefront just because of that. And another really nice example, which I thought, let me just throw this in also about the words, was I read this actually on one of the imaginative education websites. This was a high school biology teacher teaching about viruses, and that was a topic which he said had basically flopped every time he tried to teach it. So what he told the students was, he said, okay, very generally, okay, so the next topic that we're going to learn about is viruses. Right now, what I want you to do is get in groups, and I want you to think of a scenario where you have been given the job of kidnapping the CEO of a a pharmaceutical company who's just come up with some really, really breakthrough drug. And I want you to imagine his office. So it's this huge, like a building that's got 24-hour security. He's got CCTV cameras. He's got guards. He's got all kinds of security angles. And I want you to figure out how you can get in, break through all those security systems, and kidnap the CEO. And basically get the secret of this new drug out of him. And I'm giving you 25 minutes, and then each group is going to present their strategy. So 25 minutes, there was utter chaos apparently in that class, groups accusing each other of cheating and stealing each other's ideas and this and that. And finally, somewhere towards the end of the class, one kid in the very back who hadn't participated at all suddenly raised his hand and said, "Oh, Mr. So-and-so, so is this how viruses actually attack our immune systems?" And that was his cue to actually say, "What do you think? Would you like to know more about viruses?" And of course, then they were really interested in learning about viruses. So I thought that was absolutely brilliant. I don't think I would have ever thought of doing something like that. I think I've
Hi, sir.
Hi.
Maybe my question will be out of context, but as human grows with the time passes, he gets a lot of influences. Maybe it can be books, communities, schools. But when we ask a question to older guy of 40 years or 50 years,
yeah.
to many people they will have a common answer. But the same question is asked to children who are younger. Their influence is very low. Their answers can be in different ways that can be used in real world for many development. So do you think is it
I like that, yeah.
Yeah. Because
Definitely.
they have very less influence. When the people grow old, age of 40, 50,
Yeah,
they are influenced with the same education system,
right,
same communities, same books.
right.
But the same guy who is lesser old, they have only one type of genetic. They have many, but the
Yeah.
maximum is genetics.
Mm-hmm.
So that's only one type of influence they have.
Mm-hmm.
The community influence is very less, or the family one they can have.
Right.
So the answers to one question, if we ask many children of the same age
Yeah.
who are very younger,
Yeah.
the answers may be really, really different
Yeah.
that we had never thought of.
That's true. I agree with that. And again, I think that's something that that you can use very, very well to bring out the idea that that there's different ways of looking at a particular issue or concept. There's many angles.
Many perspectives, you can
Yeah,
say.
many perspectives, and also that perhaps there's no one right way to look at it.
There are many perspectives.
Right?
Like you also, you as well as me,
Yeah,
are dealing with influences.
Yeah.
What we do is because of influence. Like it can
Right.
be friend influence, relatives, or books. Maybe.
right.
Our knowledge is not indeed free knowledge. That's coming out of somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
With mixture of many perspectives, we come up with a new perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I like that. Thanks for that observation.
Right. So
Yeah.
this is kind of going even further than Professor Bhasa's question. But I've done a lot of bird walks as a kid, hosted a lot of bird walks. And one thing I notice is that in general, a lot of people who come for one of them or two of them, they're very invested in the first this thing in learning about their environment and identifying birds and stuff.
Yeah.
But the retention rate is very, very low. So there's people, I can see children are very, very engaged. But the second time around when I'm hosting something similar in the area,
Yeah.
I don't see the same faces. So I mean, in the particularly because you mentioned this in an environmental context. I just
Yeah.
wanted to ask, how do you kind of improve this retention of, even if you're engaging with them perfectly, how do you make sure they kind of continue to engage with the concept even when you're not directly involved in that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I wonder if you're able to track the people who come for your walks, if you could start trying to get some of them at least to start taking a little bit more responsibility for organizing a walk and maybe even suggesting things to talk about. I think the more that you can get some ownership from those either adults or kids that you want to see more often, that might actually help you with retention. For some reason, is that feeling of being given some responsibility that seems to help with retention, because I face this exact same problem myself, and I don't have a proper solution to it, but definitely giving some more responsibility has helped with that. So maybe it'll work for you.
Yeah, I started like a WhatsApp group and stuff for like neighborhood bird sightings,
Yeah.
but that died in like 2 days and then just never picked up.
Don't give up. Yeah.
So just sort of a follow-up comment from that question, whether in terms of education, that is sort of very similar to the to the space where uh, one is talking at the people,
Yeah.
and that is sort of the end of it.
Yeah.
And what if you bring in more in that engagement, which is not just looking at the slide or at the bird and
Right.
telling the name? So what can you think of something more than just talking at
Right.
the student? If you sort of just a thought.
Yeah, that's such an important point you made. Thanks so much for that. Is that the interaction? And I was actually hoping to be able to do something like that with you during this talk, but then I realized that with what I had to say that I'd probably run out of time to do that. But I'd like to leave you with this thought that I would actually like you to have a look at some of those cognitive tools and maybe just pick a couple to play with. And for students in particular, maybe it could be a topic that you've already studied, or it could be something that you'd like to know more about. But maybe it's something that you've already researched and you know something about. If you could maybe just pick out something that appeals to you. So if you had to teach that topic, how would you use one of those tools to go about it? So that would be fun, I think. I would have enjoyed giving you some time to do that during this talk and having you share some ideas, but I didn't want to keep you sitting here that long on a Wednesday evening. I know you've had a long day and you're probably ready for some downtime and a lot of other work. Getting ready for the next day.
I just have a quick
Yes,
question.
yes.
So, do you have any suggestion or idea for bringing this connecting to environment context in a mathematics class?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, there. I think if you have a look at the IERG website. I'll share some links that you can look at.
Okay.
One small example that I'll give you. One of my colleagues, who was a middle school math teacher, actually he used dance forms to teach about math, and it went over really well. So music and dance, something, because music is very mathematical, right? The different rags, the notes, and so somehow if you could find a way to incorporate music and
Yeah.
and dance and maybe art also into math, it might be a lot of fun.
Thank you.
But please, I do recommend, please do have a look at the website. I'll share some links specifically, because there's a whole group of people who are involved in this imaginative education. They used to be called the Imaginative Education Research Group, and now they're called something different, which I think is actually like it's like the Department of Science Education. It's a separate department, and I think it's called the Center for Imaginative Research in Education, something like that. It's the initials are CIRCE, and it's part of Simon Fraser University in Canada. So Dr. Kieran Egan actually is a Canadian educational psychologist. So I'll share those links, and because they are teachers who have been involved with this, and they've actually come up with ideas for entire unit plans. They've got lesson plans, they've got unit plans, and they've got frameworks also that you can look at and use. And obviously, it seems really daunting to learn about this stuff, but if you just try out a few things and see if it makes sense, if it helps you, then maybe later on you can try out more things, and gradually it won't take so much extra time. Anything new does, unfortunately, it does take that extra time in reading up and trying to apply it, but hopefully it makes sense and it's helpful. So thank you all for listening so patiently and asking such great questions. Really appreciate it.
So there is so much to take away from the talk, and I hope each and every one of you, I personally really was looking forward to hearing from him. So thanks a lot, Darab, and so this is a series that will continue through the semester. So keep a watch out for the talks that are. We have one next week, which I read. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much, Joy. Thank you.